Hello, so glad to have you back here for Module 3, Lesson 2. The goal is to generalize the listening to understand skill so that it benefits all of your relationships. I'm going to be giving you 3 personal examples using listening to understand when it's easy, when it's hard, and then the very hardest. Listening as the first step to resolve a difference. Listening to reduce upset, listening as comfort, and what listening is not. I'm so eager to hear your reports regarding your experiences with listening to understand. If you haven't already, I hope you'll go to the Facebook page to share your wins, as well as whatever challenges you may have had learning this new skill. In Lesson 1, you learned that repeating back is great for perception checking and for repeating a compliment back to the sender. Listening to understand is a versatile, hard worker that will enrich all of your relationships. If you, like me, are uncomfortable in some social situations, listening to understand will be your salvation. Everyone loves a good listener. Now, here are a few personal examples taken from my book, Communication Elixirs. Yes, it's available on Amazon. There are multiple opportunities in a variety of relationships where listening to understand can be used to deliver empathy and facilitate connection, however limited and fleeting. I remember once being in line at the grocery store when the customer in front of me was very upset and giving the clerk a very difficult time. I don't remember the specific issue, but it was not over anything that particular clerk had done. It was something more general about store policy. Nevertheless, he was taking out his dissatisfaction on this clerk. He finally left. As the clerk began checking my groceries, she was still frowning. I said, "That was a tough situation to handle." She looked up surprised and said, "Yes, I'm glad my shift is almost over." She sighed deeply and then smiled and appeared to be shaking it off. I said, "It's always good to head home after a hard day." She agreed. In this example, I was not listening to understand her words. I was listening to understand her feelings. By acknowledging the situation, validating that she'd handled it well, and empathizing with her feelings, I doled out a little bit of comfort and perhaps helped her regain her emotional balance. This level of listening to understand needs little effort on my part and doesn't require a deep relationship. Listening with empathy to my friend Melissa tell me about her work week is easy. I'm genuinely interested. When I express my care for her by listening, she can unload some of the rough events and celebrate her successes. We each have had the experience of seeing a solution to a problem evolve or gain understanding about ourselves as the other listened without judgment, interruptions, or advice. In a conversation where I have nothing at stake, no position to defend, this level of caring can be easy to learn and to do, and is very bonding. These examples of listening to understand only need me to be aware of what the other person is experiencing in the moment. I'm giving what I would hope to receive if I were in the other's shoes. Situations like the ones I just recounted are a good place to begin to practice listening to understand. This skill is appropriate, not only for uncomfortable emotions or situations, but for happy ones too. You may realize you've already been doing it. So here's another personal example, but was much harder. Max and Toby, my Maltese dogs, were still puppies. Their house manners were not very dependable. We were staying with my sister for a few days. They were used to the laminate floor in my house where they couldn't run without slipping. So having a big, expansive carpet was a new and exciting experience. My sister and I laughed when they rambunctiously chased each other in a giant figure 8 around the den, across the hall, around the big living room, and back again. It was fun to see their exuberant play. What we didn't realize at the time, but my sister discovered later, was that they were stopping to mark, meaning pee on, the corners of her furniture as they circled the living room. When she told me what she'd found, I was mortified. I shampooed the furniture and carpet, of course. I adore Max and Toby. They are part of my family. I thought I'd just have to watch them more closely whenever we were visiting my sister. A few days later, she asked if we could talk. She explained that she's not really an animal person and that animals in the house were especially hard for her. I already knew this. She understood how much I love Max and Toby, but in the future, when I visited, she wanted them to remain outside. Her home is beautiful. She's an immaculate housekeeper. At that time, she had young grandchildren who regularly played on the floor. In her eyes, the floor was now repulsively dirty and perhaps germ-ridden. While she was expressing herself, here is what was running through my mind. First, how can she not love Max and Toby? They are such sweet dogs and so cute. What if it's a very hot day or raining when she wants them to remain outside? Every spot has been cleaned. There's nothing here that could possibly hurt her grandchildren. This is a great example of planning a rebuttal while she's speaking rather than listening to understand. Then, as I put myself in her shoes, making the internal switch from my perspective to her perspective, I imagined myself with her dislike of animals. I recognized what a concession it was for her to allow them into her house to begin with. I knew that their marking had pushed her way beyond her ability to be tolerant. And the bottom line, we, the dogs and I, were guests in her home. She had every right to make the rules for her own home. I knew that if I were her, with her history and her perspective, I would feel the same way and ask that my boundary be respectfully observed. In fact, knowing how much she enjoys being a hostess and how much pleasure it gives her to please others, I felt admiration for the courage it took for her to ask for this restriction. All of these thoughts only took a minute or two. I said, I understand. Because Max and Toby mean so much to me, I'm far more tolerant of their misbehaviors than I can expect you to be. From now on, when I'm here, they will either stay home or remain outside. I appreciate you being honest with me about how you feel. I don't want dogs or anything else to get in the way of our love for each other. And that was the truth. This time, listening to understand, reaching to understand a person's position that was different than mine, was a little harder. My preferred outcome had to be surrendered. But I was willing to see her point of view, and since this was, after all, her home, the choice was clear. I agreed to her wishes because I value my relationship with her. I did so graciously, even though I was disappointed. Here's the hardest personal example of listening to understand. I remarried when my youngest was 13. The new family brought with it a lot of changes for Peter. I made the common step-family mistake of giving the bulk of my energy and attention to developing the relationships with my new husband and his children. I thought my relationship with my sons was solid, not needing extra attention. And then the conflict with Jim began to escalate, and my elder son began acting out pretty severely. Peter was lost in the shuffle, the proverbial good kid that basically took care of himself. Years later, the damage from the emotional turmoil of his teen years began to demand attention. He finally let all the anger out that had been bottled up while he survived. His anger was expressed as avoidance of me, obvious snubs at extended family gatherings, and refusals to talk about it. At the time, I had no idea what was causing his behavior change toward me. Up until then, we'd had what I thought was a pretty open and affectionate relationship. A couple of times during this period, he did agree to talk with me about his feelings, but as he tried to tell me what those years were like for him, I blew it. I responded defensively, listing all the things I was trying to cope with during that time. My reasons for neglecting him, for making some very hurtful decisions that affected him. Predictably, he shut down and left the conversation. It took quite a while for me to stop blaming him for his refusal to talk and to recognize my responsibility for refusing to listen. Maybe I hadn't healed up enough from those years myself, but I really wanted the rift between us to be healed. So a few years later, yes, years, whenever Peter would recall something from those nightmare years, I just practiced listening to understand. I realized that he needed for me to hear his pain. Until he felt seen, heard, and valued, remember the quote by Brené Brown, we wouldn't be able to reconnect in any meaningful way. I accepted that I had Jim, our coach, a few close friends to whom I had shared my pain from those years. I didn't need for Peter, my son, to be the listener for me. But he definitely needed for me to hear his pain from those hard years. So on several occasions over the next several months, he would recall painful events and feelings, and I would listen, sometimes quietly, sometimes saying things like, "That impacted you deeply. It still hurts to remember, doesn't it? You felt abandoned." Occasionally I would add, "You have every right to feel the way you do. The things that happened, and often the way I handled them, would be hurtful to anyone." In some cases, I disagreed with Peter's memory of an event, but it wasn't the time to argue over whose memory was the most accurate. It was just time to listen and heal. In your playbook, as a bonus, you have a section on giving an effective apology. Apologies cannot be used as a shortcut to get through the other's pain. An apology is only effective after the wrongdoer really understands the pain caused by his or her actions. So for a long time, when Peter was sharing his pain, I would just listen with deep caring. Often we shared tears. Eventually I apologized and gained Peter's forgiveness. Apologizing before he knew I had heard the depth of his pain would not have brought much healing. My example of listening to understand my son's pain is a good example of the power of this skill to heal a relationship. Although we live 350 miles away from each other, we enjoy long catching-up calls now, released from the pain of the past, and enjoy each other's company as often as we can. Listening is a wonderful way to reduce someone else's upset. At the end of chapter 15 of the how-to book, you can read about how hostage negotiators are trained to repeat back the demands of the perpetrator because it calms them down. Sometimes we can feel like a hostage when in the presence of someone who is very upset, either upset with you personally or upset about something or someone else. In either case, the easiest way to reduce the charge in the air is to listen to understand. We were on vacation and about to visit a new museum in Scottsdale, Arizona. The entrance was a long corridor with gift shops on one side and an open courtyard on the other. Jim hated window shopping, but was gracious when I asked to browse around a little before entering the main museum. We both went into the first gift shop. I looked around for a few moments, then turned toward the door. I couldn't see Jim. Although this has rarely happened to me, I panicked. Where was he? Why couldn't I see him? I couldn't breathe. I stepped into the wide corridor. It was about 100 feet long with at least 100 visitors, like us, milling around. Jim was 6'2" with white hair. He was usually easy to spot, but I couldn't see him. I strode down the corridor looking in shop windows as I went, finally spotting Jim near the end. I stomped up to him and shouted, "Why did you go off and leave me like that?" He shot back, "What am I, a dog on a leash?" We were both stunned. It had been several years since we'd had a blow-up like this one. We both went to the car to cool off. On the way there, I was asking myself, what happened? Why did I panic? There was no danger that Jim would leave me there. When we got into the car, both breathing hard, Jim said, "I'm going for a walk." That was a great option. Back in the bad old days, we'd both learned how to vent our anger away from each other before trying to talk it out. But I thought I might be able to shorten our recovery time if I used listening to understand. I said, "You're angry with me," responding to his feelings. Jim said, "Yes, I'm very angry with you." I repeated that and went on to repeat how he was embarrassed to be yelled at in public. Everyone turned to look at us. He didn't deserve my yelling. With every repetition of his statements, his volume decreased, the level of intensity decreased. He finally said no when I asked if he needed to say anything else. I asked, "Are you able to hear me now?" This is an important question because when we're that triggered, that upset, it's hard to hear the other person until the emotions are calmer. He may have needed a few more minutes to be in a listening mindset. He said yes, he would try. First, I apologized. He didn't deserve to be yelled at in public. He accepted my apology. I reminded him that in the past 18 months, I'd lost 3 family members that I was close to. I said, "I know it wasn't logical. I know you wouldn't leave me here. But in that instant, I was afraid that you had died too." Jim quickly said, "Nancy, I wouldn't do that to you for the world. I am so sorry." We went on to make an agreement about how we would handle separations when we're in public, letting each other know when we're leaving and where to meet and when. But this example is to illustrate what a practical, powerful tool listening to understand is for reducing upset. This time, I was the one who used it, but Jim was often the first one to begin listening to understand. In our classes, we used to say that the one who started listening to understand first was the smartest person. You will meet Earl and his wife Crystal in a future lesson. Earl shared with me this week that he used listening to understand with a potential client who was very upset. As he repeated back her complaints, she calmed down and Earl made the sale. So how about listening as comfort? What if it's not the relationship that's damaged? What do you do when someone is just in pain from the loss of a spouse, the loss of a child, the loss of a job, the loss of a marriage? How can you deliver comfort when there's nothing you can do to change the situation? You just listen with caring. Your only objective is to see this human being, hear their pain, and value them as they are going through this excruciating time in their life. Our culture tends to be a doing, not a listening culture when it comes to tragedy. Bring a casserole, order flowers, attend a service, etc. But in reality, our culture almost has a phobia about death or other tragedies. Many don't want to be near it, like it's a contagious disease. I was 23 when my first husband died unexpectedly. I had 2 baby boys at the time. It was so unusual, so crazy, that everyone was shocked and hurt by his death. I heard stupid things like, "You're young, you'll find love again." Really? What about the chasm of pain I'm feeling because I just lost a wonderful husband? Or, "You must be strong for the boys." I don't know how I can do this. I want to die too. And, "Now you're a mother and a father to them." Like I could take their father's place? Give me a break. These words are delivered to make the speaker feel better. They are words to distract from pain rather than understanding. Words like these create distance rather than comforting connection. There were 4 women who gave me profound comfort during the week after he died. One was my sister Sally. She was staying with me for a day or 2 before the memorial service. We sat down to eat lunch and, as was our custom, bowed our heads to say grace. I began to cry, unable even to bless the food. After a while I looked up. Sally was crying with me. She listened to understand by hearing my unspoken grief and grieved with me. There were no meaningless words like, "It's going to be okay," or even, "I'm here for you." She just cried with me. The other 3 women who stopped by my house to see me were widows who had been through what I was going through. They just listened and were present, not afraid of my grief, just there with me. These 4 women listened to understand in the most profound way, bringing comfort and connection. What listening is not. Me too. Listening is not taking place if you are thinking of a similar story to share, like, "Wait until you hear what happened to me," or "I know how you feel. I lost my cat recently." Someone actually said that to me after my husband died. I love my pets too, but really? I can fix that. Listening is not taking place if you are thinking of giving advice to fix the situation. Delivering your logic without permission is such an act of disrespect. It says, basically, "I'm smarter than you. I can figure this out for you. You aren't smart enough to find a solution on your own." Advice is wonderful when it's requested, but not when it is given instead of listening. "Not me" is another thing that could be happening when you're really not listening. Listening is not happening if you're thinking of reasons why you are not at fault. Defensiveness is one of the defective communication tools listed in the inventory in your playbook. We'll talk more about it in Module 4. If you are defensive, you are not at that moment able to see the situation from the speaker's point of view. Or you're simply not paying attention. Here's a listening rule. If you want someone to share deeply with you, you must make it safe for him or her to do so. Safety is created and slowly increased as you listen to understand. Even if it wasn't a more humane, compassionate, and effective way to handle differences in a relationship, listening to understand would be an excellent personal growth exercise. It requires that I be selfless, even if it's only while I am listening. Listening to understand is a pathway to connection. As in the examples above, it may be a momentary friendly connection with a stranger, or facilitate the deeper relationship connections that we are hardwired to need. Improving my listening skills is a constant challenge for me. I continue to be in awe of the power released by listening to understand. The biggest challenge to listening is setting aside my own agenda or feelings in order to truly step into the speaker's world. Listening to their words, body language, facial expression, feelings, as though I am in their place experiencing what they are experiencing. This was hardest when listening to my son's pain because my impulse was to defend myself. I wanted him to understand what I was going through at the time. I wanted to avoid my own pain of hearing how much pain he had experienced due to some of my choices. The next biggest challenge is recognizing what a powerful, tender, loving gift it is to just listen without passing judgment. Repeating back in your own words gives validity to the experience of the speaker. Even when you go on to disagree, the connection is still there that protects the relationship because you cared enough to really hear and respect his or her point of view. For myself, and as clients have reported, listening to another's upset without jumping in to fix it is a huge challenge. Giving advice that hasn't been requested is so disrespectful. It conveys one of these messages. A, I'm tired of listening to your problems and want it and you to go away. Or B, I want to relieve my own anxiety about you by giving you advice. Or C, you're stupid if you can't see the answer. Here's our real couple for this lesson, Chris and Felicia. I received these statements after coaching Chris and Felicia a few years ago. They've since moved to Colorado, but recently sent an email saying how well they were doing. Chris, an engineer, which you may be able to tell, says, while many of us might benefit from years of psychoanalysis to become better relationship experts, few of us have the time, emotion, or resource to undertake this lengthy and sometimes arduous process. Nancy takes a thoughtful, insightful, yet wholly pragmatic approach toward relationship building that focuses upon the mechanisms of communication and understanding. These techniques and insights, if practiced, yield real growth and understanding in a relationship by smoothing out the day-to-day obstacles to communication and replacing misunderstanding with mutual respect, empathy, and intimacy. His wife Felicia says, probably most of us have not had the best role models for a good marriage. We enter into these relationships with all the love and sweetness, only to find out how we can't even communicate with one another. Most of our arguments stem from simple misunderstandings. It can be very frustrating and very demoralizing. Fast forward to Nancy. Yay! What a wonderful, caring, and practical coach. She is amazing. I would highly recommend her skills and expertise, and already have. Her books are insightful, funny, and very poignant. If you're having issues with your spouse, child, parent, Nancy can help you bridge these gaps with real help, not just a bunch of psychobabble. Thank you, Nancy. We love you. They were effusive in their praise of me, but the real praise belongs to the skills that they learned and then practiced. Quote, when feelings of not being understood come out as anger, hearing them, not shutting your ears and fighting back, is the key to calming things down. Thanks to Michael Nichols for that quote. Listening is being totally present with my whole being. Mark Nepo. Download your game page for this module and begin to experience the magic as well as the challenge of listening to understand. Keep up the good work delivering love in your partner's love language. Although it's not listed on this week's game page, practice listening more intentionally with everyone you encounter this week. Tell us your experience on our private Facebook page. Module 4 is one of my personal favorites. You'll learn how to speak so that your message is easier to hear. This was one of the pivotal skills that transformed our marriage and my life. See you there.